City on a Hill, Volume 4. A Dream of Kali. It is nonsense to claim that terrorists have no morality. Charges of nihilism against an adversary usually reflect ignorance of the adversary's moral framework. Suicide bombers are often motivated by beliefs they hold sacred in their own moral reasoning. Scott Atran, Ph.D. The Moral Logic and Growth of Suicide Terrorism. The Washington Quarterly. Spring 2006, page 136. Chapter 26. Zell. Sabrina could not feel her legs. Waist down was a single, steady, undecipherable numbness. She strained to move her foot and heard her boots scraping against underbrush. Twigs, leaves, seedlings ground under her heel. It was as sweet a sound as she had ever heard. Encouraged, she propped herself up on her elbow. She then realized the unrelenting sensation throughout her body was not numbness, but pain. Pain so uniform and intense that it canceled any other feeling. But she kept herself balanced on her elbow to watch her knees bend and legs unfold, just for the relief of knowing they worked and that her back was not broken. She tried to study her surroundings, but turning her head sent pain shooting through her neck. Even as she winced, the tensing of her muscles caused an even greater pain in her chest. For a moment, she could not even inhale. Right. A fine mess I am. She had tumbled off the glider wreckage and onto a rock that her rib cage had folded around. She suspected a bruised, even broken rib. The glider was a wreck, its structure twisted and its metal skin torn, making her wonder if the pilot had survived. Walking was still out of the question, so she crawled on hands and elbows to the opposite side of the crumpled airfoil. The glider had hit the trees at an angle. The wing had cut through branches, snagging them in the intakes and wedging them in the ailerons. The starboard side had taken the brunt of the impact, crumpling up to the protective bars around the right seat. Had Sabrina been sitting there, she would have been crushed. The left-hand seat where the woman sat had been farthest from the impact. She was still alive, although the frame around her had been jammed onto her chest, making it difficult for her to breathe. She was struggling with the buckle, which had pulled back over her hips as the struts of the craft had bent. With her arms pinned against her shoulders, the belt latch was out of her reach. Sabrina unfastened it and set her free. The woman cried out as she brushed her wounded leg against the wreckage, leaving the deformed metal red as if it had been passed over with a paintbrush. Sabrina settled her against a tree trunk, the effort exhausting both of them. Through the branches above that they had broken through, the stars were visible. Sabrina still saw the city lights, burning as if right before her face. She had killed Bran. That knowledge was worse than any physical pain she was experiencing. She was surprised she had not died in the crash. It was what she deserved. She felt like she would vomit and had to steady herself against another tree. The air popped with a few more explosions, the hiss of plasma rifles, and the shouts of men while she strained to keep control. Her thoughts were jumbled. She had so many questions, and no answers, no solutions. She had just wanted to know how Bran could have been so insistent on killing the woman. Was there something he knew that she did not, or was it just the endless brainwashing all the rebels received from their leaders? Is it real? The city. Is it real? Sabrina asked, the words catching in her throat. The woman looked at her strangely, her chest still heaving. Sabrina could not wait for her to compose herself. I killed a good man for you. You better answer. She spat. It's real. It's real. The radiation? The woman shook her head. Doesn't exist. At least not here. She stopped abruptly and turned her head in the direction of approaching voices. You are a ministry officer? She spoke the words slowly as if she were not familiar with Sabrina's language. A cadet. Or I was. They will kill us both unless I am your prisoner. Sabrina's mind was still fogged, but she slowly caught the woman's meaning. You'll have to cuff me, the woman said. Sabrina decided it was a good idea, pulling a binding strip from her belt and slapped it around the woman's wrists. The woman she had killed Bran for, who wore a uniform like her own. Was it worth it? Was it worth Bran? More voices filtered through the trees. The woman tensed. Help them! Help them find us, or they will kill you as a traitor. Why are you... I don't know who you are, or what side you are on. But if you live, I have a chance. If you are dead, so am I. I don't know what you want, but I don't want to die. I want answers. I want to know what you are doing here. What that city on the other side of the wall is doing there. Sabrina said, angry, her cheeks flush with a rush of blood. The woman swallowed, closed her eyes, and leaned her head back against the tree. The sound of rebels in the woods were growing closer. I can give you answers, but... The woman paused. But I might not believe you. You might not want to believe. Sabrina could hear branches and underbrush snapping underfoot, a plasma rifle charging. I'll decide what I want to believe, but you give me answers, I'll keep you alive. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'll keep it. The woman gave a feeble nod. Done. Sabrina struggled to stand, leaning heavily on a cedar tree until she mustered the strength to limp to the side of the glider, open a panel, and remove a flare. She snapped off the end and primed it. You tried to escape, Sabrina said. I leapt on the glider to stop you. It crashed when it took fire from the wall. The woman nodded in consent as she removed her belt and wrapped it around her leg as a tourniquet. Sabrina struck the flare, and its brightness blossomed outwards, drowning out the light of the stars. The rebels who found them were not men she knew, but they knew her. They came cautiously out of the woods, blinking in the blinding light of the flare, their rifles raised. They carried heavy packs and bandoliers of ammunition. Their pants were tucked into their boots, their heads wrapped with leather bands that held flaps to cover the sides and backs of their heads. They were outfitted for the desert, and the sand encrusted in their boots, on their knees, and discoloring their beards and hands, spoke of a long journey. A tall man, his long hair held back in a ponytail, ordered one of the men to kill the flare. We don't want any more company from the wall than we need, he said, leveling his weapon at Sabrina. He and his men took in the scene slowly. All of them looked gaunt, their clothes hanging loosely from their bodies and their belts pulled tight around their waists. Two younger ones, boys really, lined up on either side of Sabrina, their rifles aimed at her and the woman. Others moved around the perimeter of the clearing. Their long-haired commander stood in front of her, asking questions. What are you doing here? I don't remember you being a part of the assault. Sabrina made a decision that the truth would serve her best. I wasn't, at least to my knowledge. Theopan came to me in the sanctuary last night while I was with Lindsay, and talked to me about believing, doubting, and truth. He said I needed to go to the wall, see things for myself, to understand. He gave me my patrol suit back, along with provisions. He never said anything about the assault. Don't know if he wanted me to see it, or be part of it, or get killed by it. The skin on the side of her questioner's face twitched as if an insect had landed there. He rubbed the spot, his whiskers making a noise like sandpaper. Why do you think he would not tell you about it? Maybe he doesn't trust me. Maybe he thought I wouldn't come. I can't say. I don't profess to understand how Theopan's mind works. She was trying to strike an honest tone. I spoke to him about doubt. He spoke to me about seeking answers. To get answers, I took her. She nodded towards the woman, then recounted the version of events they had agreed upon. We were told to take no prisoners, the man said. Then that is a more concrete order than I was given. He told me to seek understanding. Well, she is my understanding. I want to question her. We were told to kill all we encountered. I was not told that. Maybe we should not discuss this in front of the prisoner. The man twisted his mouth as if making a difficult decision. Finally, he sighed. No time. We'll take her, but she's your responsibility. Roach! he said, turning to a figure in the brush. "Patch the prisoner's leg and get some bandages for Sister Sabrina's head." Sabrina touched her brow. Her hair was matted with warm, sticky blood. "My foot is burnt too," she said, instantly regretting it, but the exhaustion, shock, and pain kept her from thinking straight. "I need to be more careful." "Is that a plasma burn?" the man asked her. "No, it's from the jet." The commander nodded, his eyes scanning the clearing, watching his men and the sky. The sounds of plasma and projectile fire still sounded in the woods all around them. Between the trees, Sabrina could see muzzle flashes, and above, plasma bolts shot back and forth from the ground to the wall. "He maintains a strong sense of his surroundings," Sabrina thought, considering the commander. She respected that. She wondered if he was one of Grange's men, or one of Theopin's. Roach, the team medic, treated Sabrina's foot. "Bran is dead," he said as he applied a salve. "You know him, right?" Sabrina felt Roach and his commander watching her closely. "How?" she asked. "Fell from the wall. He'd been the first through a breach in the tower. Too much rubble had fallen for the others to follow. Looked like one of his own explosives malfunctioned." He dropped his eyes to the ground, genuine sadness in them. She concluded that this man was likely one of Grange's. When he raised his eyes again, he was looking in the direction of the wall, as if watching Bran's death unfold again. "He fell down the same tower you launched from." He shook his head and returned his gaze to Sabrina. "Did you see anything?" Sabrina shook her head and fought a lump forming in her throat. "That's all right, I suppose," he said, tapping a black object strapped onto his shoulder harness. "We all got these." "Got what?" Sabrina asked, squinting in the darkness. "Cameras. Recorded everything from the attack. We used them to learn. We recovered Bran's. We'll be able to see his last moments. I'll tell you this much. If your prisoner pulled the trigger on him, I doubt she'll last long, no matter what answers she gives you." The rebel force dispersed into the night as quickly as it had appeared, with fighting groups breaking into smaller bands of 6, each taking a different route back to their home base. Some not returning at all, but rather trekking to different desert hideaways or even joining other attacks to keep the Wall Watchers on the defensive. Wall Watcher was the name rebels used for the woman Sabrina had captured. Wall Watchers were considered to be on the same side as Ministry agents and T-men. Sabrina insisted to her companions that she had never come across their like in any Ministry department. Her prisoner offered no enlightenment. She rode in silence, cuffed to a stretcher borne between 2 rebels. Michael, the long-haired commander, suggested that perhaps Sabrina did not know about the Wall Watchers because she was only a cadet. She agreed in order to divert his questioning, but knew something did not add up. She had always thought that the Wall's defenses were automated. What need was there for guards if the lands beyond were uninhabitable, even deadly? And yet a whole city waits on the other side. What is the Wall hiding from us? Sabrina's gaze came to rest on the figure in the stretcher. What can she reveal? They marched through the night at a quick pace despite the prisoner on the stretcher. After a few hours, the men were too tired to talk. Sabrina was grateful. It gave her time to think through the mysteries swirling in her mind, but her thoughts produced no answers, only more questions. The rebels had taken plasma rifles, explosives, and also helmets, the same that the special investigators wore. These were more prized than the rifles. Each man carried at least 3 in netting slung over his shoulder. One rebel carried nothing but helmets. Even his own gun had been abandoned at the wall to grab one more set of headgear. What could be so significant about the helmets? The stars grew dim in the west as the sun began to rise. Before it was full light, the team made camp inside a cave they had scouted out the previous day. They ate, took their water rations, and set up a watch rotation. While the men slept, Sabrina checked on her prisoner. She was pale, her lips dry and cracked from dehydration, and an unpleasant odor wafted from the bullet wound on her left leg. Sabrina offered her share of water to her. She drank it down quickly. There was little else to say with the other rebels so close. Sabrina wanted to apologize. Michael was right. Her prisoner was in danger, even if she did not kill Bran. But releasing her was out of the question. Even if Sabrina could engineer an escape, flight was impossible with a bullet in her leg. Sabrina left her to rest, Before she could resolve a solution for her captive, her mind was pulled back to the camera on Bran. Michael said one of the other teams had recovered it from his remains. The image of his body lying there in the rubble made her breath catch in her throat. Exhausted as she was, she could not sleep, her mind racing from one incongruity to the next, one possibility to another. Instead, she went to the mouth of the cave where one of the rebels was keeping watch. Sabrina sat beside him, blinking in the intense daylight and listening to the humming silence of the desert, broken only occasionally by the screech of a passing Elved as it left a white vapor trail against the sapphire sky. Sabrina was glad to be hidden. She dozed, only to awake when Michael relieved the rebel guard. It was still daylight. Even in the shade of the cave, the heat from the desert was like an oven. Michael had stripped off his jacket and tied it about his waist. His hair was held up from his shoulders by a wet bandana tied around his head. Sweat darkened his short-sleeved shirt, which was stained with sand and oil. He adjusted the rifle strap on his shoulder, moving the metal buckle away from his skin, as if it was too hot to remain there. With blistered and cracked hands, he opened his canteen, took a drink, then offered it to Sabrina. Sabrina took it since she had shared her own with the prisoner.
"Couldn't sleep?"
Michael asked, resting his hands on his knees. "No," was all Sabrina offered. After a long silence, she realized she owed Michael something more. "Too many questions."
"You said you came to the wall for answers, but you have yet to interrogate the Watcher."
Sabrina had no reply. She had had ample opportunity to probe the prisoner while they hiked across the moonlit desert, but she had remained reticent, ruminating over what she had learned already. She was also protective of what the woman might reveal. Bran had not wanted to face the truth of the city. She guessed that these men, even if they were friendly with Grange, wouldn't be any better.
"You afraid?"
Michael's question broke into her thoughts.
"What did you say?"
she said, the tension rising in her chest. Beads of sweat dripped from her forehead. Her armpits stank with perspiration.
"You heard me, Sister Sabrina,"
Michael said. There was no challenge in his tone or on his face, just a calm that his whole body exuded, his legs out, his arms resting on his knee pads, and his rifle leaning against the wall.
"I would be scared. The Master knows what lies she might tell you. Or worse, the truth,"
he snorted. Sabrina felt her shoulders unwind. As much as she hated to admit it, Michael was right. She was afraid.
"You might not want to believe." "I did not want to question her in front of the men," she said.
"Wise," Michael said, his eyebrows rising.
"But they are now all asleep, and I won't disturb you."
She had waited too long. Sabrina stood up, her knees cracking. She was lightheaded from the heat and had to steady herself against the wall. For a moment her eyesight dimmed, and she focused on the feel of the sandstone beneath her fingertips until she felt herself again.
"You all right?"
Michael asked her.
"Just a little dehydrated. I'll take your advice and interrogate her. Good luck."
The prisoner was in the main room of the cave, set off from the sleeping rebels. It was dark, and it took Sabrina's eyes so long to adjust from the brightness outside that she flipped down her visor and took in the scene through the emerald view of her night vision. The suit was still over half charged, and she used its power to lift the woman up and carry her to another room towards the front of the cave. She passed Michael, and he gave a slow, approving nod. The woman had awoken the moment Sabrina had lifted her, but she said nothing. Sabrina put her down on a bed of scree and stuffed the satchel from Theopin under her head as a pillow. Sabrina offered her more water. After she had drunk, she said, "I don't imagine you brought me here because you wanted to find me a better place to sleep. You know why I brought you here. There's not much time left before we reach camp."
"Zell."
"What?" "My name is Zell," the woman said, her voice rising with a touch of impatience.
"Sabrina Sabria, was a cadet. I know who you are, cadet. Or at least, who you think you are."
"What does that mean?" Zell sighed.
"It means you have opened the floodgates, and are about to be overwhelmed. You'll forgive me if I'm growing a little weary of your proclamations of how dangerous the truth is. I get enough of that from those believers."
So you don't count yourself as one, Sister Sabrina? She said, echoing what Michael had called her. Sabrina thought to answer, but was aware Zell might be trying to isolate her from the others, as if she was not already isolated enough. You said you would give me answers. Zell smiled. I did, and I will. Do you have good questions? I'm tired of playing games, Sabrina said, leaning forward, her voice rising, her hand resting on her blaster grip. But are you ready, Cadet? Zell interrupted her, her own voice rising with defiance. It is not every day that you learn the entire world you know is a fiction. Not everyone can handle that. Sabrina felt a cold stab of fear in her gut. Try me. I'll decide what to believe. Zell pushed up to a sitting position and adjusted herself against the wall. With a deep breath, she began. The Twin Cities are not a refuge of the last survivors of a nuclear holocaust. They are a social experiment that no one knows how to stop. So there are people in that city I saw over the wall. Zell grimaced. There are people all over the planet. Billions of them. Sabrina was doubtful. She had learned in school that powerful weapons had rendered most of the planet an uninhabitable wasteland. What proof do you have? Nothing but a story, Cadet. An alternative history to yours. One in which there is a cataclysm, but much smaller than the one you learned about in the ministry schools. An arsenal of weapons was never unleashed on the planet. One was. A civilization was not destroyed, but a city was. Millions were killed. Precious artifacts lost forever, all because of the actions of religious extremists. Yes, that much is true. But the worldwide conflict you are taught about never happened. It was a future we feared, but averted. Even in the darkness of the cave, Sabrina could see Zell's eyes gleaming with conviction. How was it averted? A plan. By an ingenious young neuroscientist who proposed a region sealed off from the rest of the world, where the extremists and religious could be corralled and cured. Cured? Of memories, of hate. Their old identities stripped away, and new memories implanted. New memories of an invented apocalypse. New families that consisted of husbands and wives from formerly warring sides. Their children would be offspring of both. It would be a utopia, free of sectarian divisions of old that threatened to tear civilization apart. A deception on an impossibly large scale, Sabrina said, making no effort to conceal her skepticism. She could hear the other rebels stirring deeper in the cave. She was starting to regret interrogating Zell at all. She wanted the truth, and she was bitter that Zell had not cooperated. Her stomach twisted at the thought they would have to torture the woman for the actual truth. The scree crunched under her feet as she got up to leave. I thought, with so much time on that stretcher, you could have come up with a more plausible story. I wish it did sound more plausible. I wish you were not brainwashed. Sabrina turned on her, taking her collar in her fist. A whole population. 2 cities full of people. Living lives and memories that are not their own. Sabrina released the woman and ran her sleeve across her forehead to absorb the sweat. She didn't care if her outburst had been overheard. The woman was spouting nonsense. I should have never taken her prisoner. Sabrina moved toward the entryway, but the woman spoke out. Cities canvassed by comtors that no one really understands. Patrolled by men that nobody knows, in helmets nobody else has. Open your eyes, Cadet. My eyes are open. I saw a city, yes, but... She suddenly remembered the pitchball stadium she had seen. All the people, the ultra-green grass, the towering, gleaming buildings in the distance. I also saw an empty wasteland surrounding it. Without radiation. Sabrina was quiet. In her mind's eye, she again saw the blank readouts, the indicators of nil, where she had expected glowing radiation. When she did not answer, Zell continued from the darkness.
I thought you of all people might believe. After all, you know the neuroscientist who started it all. You know Dagosta.
The sun set in swirling bands of reds and purples. After a brief meal of dried rations, the rebels renewed their march. Sabrina remained at the vanguard, alongside Michael, where she could use her visor to scan the terrain before them. It also kept her clear of the rear of the group, where the rebels carried Zell.
How could I have been so stupid?
She had half a mind to tell the men not to bother, to drop Zell off in the desert and let her try to find her way back to the wall. But she knew she could not do that. Maybe Bran had been right all along. Maybe it was foolish, dangerous to speak to the wall watchers, whoever they were. She tried to focus on the path ahead, finding the most expedient way forward that was close to cover, in case they had to hide. She also scanned for scorpions, snakes, and arachnids, anything to keep her mind occupied, anything to keep her from the disturbing revelation that everything seemed to lead back to Dag. A little after midnight, they stopped for a break in a copse of acacia trees. The men collapsed in a circle, Zell's stretcher in the center of it. Their bodies heaved with heavy breathing, their limbs shaking with exhaustion as they passed around a canteen. A few of them broke open rations and ate. The desert air was cold, and they wore jackets again, along with their head wraps. Sabrina wandered off to the edge of the trees and kept her visor on the sky. She was scanning for Elveds and any other rebel parties when Michael came up beside her.
"Did you get your answers?"
he finally asked, his gaze locked on the horizon. A desert hare darted out of some bushes and across the hardpan, disappearing into sere grass. With his natural sight, Michael could not see it, but he tilted his head toward the sound.
"Just a jackrabbit,"
Sabrina said. She lifted the visor up to look at Michael with her own eyes.
"And no, I didn't."
"Would she talk?"
"She did, but all lies."
"How do you know?"
"None of it's plausible."
"Well," Michael said, rubbing his whiskers, "you worked at the ministry. You should know what plausible is, right? You knew about all us out here in the desert."
"No, I didn't."
Sabrina shook her head. She remembered something Zell had said.
"Michael, you all stormed the wall for supplies. You took guns. But you took even more helmets, the kind the T-men wear. Why?"
"We were ordered to. And I imagine they are for us to wear when, or if, we ever return to the city."
"What do the helmets have to do with it?"
"I'm not sure,"
he said, looking over his shoulder and watching his men for a moment.
"But among those in my rank, we all have our theories."
"What do you think?"
A breeze puffed the tree branches above them. Dried leaves tumbled down to land softly on the rippled sand. The moon was just rising on the horizon, orange-red like a blood orange. Michael looked back at her. Even in the darkness, she could see how his eyes were bloodshot from fatigue.
"It has something to do with the mind. People come out of the cities out here and say they remember things, almost like other lives. Then kids are born out here and go in on pilgrimage, and they say they can't remember a thing until they return. It's why all the scrits, as you call them, have instructions tattooed on them."
"Once they make it back here, they can remember again?"
"Yep, they are normal."
"Grange said he had memories of another life. Do you?"
"No, I'm too young. It seems only like the 40-somethings and older have those."
"Do they have memories before they come?"
"No, the memories start to emerge a few miles outside the city. About the same time most people who are going to get it fall to the rage."
"It's a set distance?"
"Pretty consistent. We're careful not to go too close when we're on patrol."
"What do you all think it is, exactly?"
"I don't know, but I suspect our higher-ups do. Most of us think it has to do with the comm towers, to be honest. But it's all just conjecture. Where are you going?"
Sabrina was making her way back through the trees, her mind on fire.
"I need some water."
Sabrina didn't speak the rest of the journey, except to communicate details of their path to Michael and the other men. A few times she jogged back to the rear where Roach and another rebel named Daniel carried the stretcher. Sabrina relieved Daniel. When they stopped for a break and Roach wandered away to relieve himself, she turned to Zell. She had been quiet, but Sabrina knew she was not asleep. The journey was too uneven for that.
How did you know that I know Dag?
Your uncle? I know because of my rank. I'm allowed to assess certain surveillance information. We do watch and listen. To the cities, to the caves. We know more than even Dag. But don't worry. I'm not about to tell them who you are.
Why did you say Dag was the neuroscientist who helped to found the Twin Cities? He wasn't even born then.
A lie, Cadet. The cities are not nearly as old as so many think.
We're taught that the cataclysm was 90 years ago. The cities are nearing their 100th anniversary.
Closer to 40.
She closed her eyes and saw Jacob sitting in the back of a cruiser, the mesh between them forming a cross hatch of shadows across his face. His eyes were wide with terror, but also an undeniable urge to trust her.
Why are they out in the desert?
To be safe from the rays.
The sun's rays? The desert does not seem to be a good place to avoid the sun's rays.
No, something worse. Something in the city.
Sabrina took a deep breath, overcoming the same reluctance she had felt when uttering words of cult speak.
If what you are saying is true, the comm towers broadcast out memories to those who have had their identities erased. These people, like Grange, were actually around during the cataclysm?
Careful, Cadet. Almost sounds like you are starting to believe me, Zell said, shifting her weight and propping herself up on her elbows. In the faint light of the stars, the blood on her bandages was visible as dark splotches. She shook her head and gingerly moved her thigh. The small movement made her wince.
I'll make sure you are seen when we reach the caves,
Sabrina said, her voice calmer than she felt.
Thank you. What about those people born here? People like me who were born after the cataclysm and the founding. Their only memories are of Fortinbras or Lysander.
From what I understand of the technology, the towers broadcast a signal that interferes with the formation and maintenance of memories. That suppresses the old memories of the old-timers and lets them live, believing the implanted memories. Roach was wandering over to some of his fellow rebels who were resting on a chalky outcrop of stone. Michael was screwing the cap back on his canteen and working the laces of his boots. They still had some time, but not much. This is a problem with people like you who are born here, because you can't form your own memories, said Zell.
Like Skrits. But then why am I not a Skrit? Why can I remember?
Most children of the Twin Cities are treated with a serum, along with their childhood inoculations. This allows them to be unaffected by the comm towers. But there are side effects. A small percentage of the children treated develop some level of precognition.
Precognition?
Sabrina said the word slowly, turning its meaning over in her mind. Visions. They can see the future. Or so some think.
Lindsay
Medina, your friend, Zell said, Sabrina snapping her head around at the mention of her friend's full name. A wry smile played across Zell's mouth. Yes, she is one of them. Dag has gone through great lengths to protect her and other children like her.
Protect them from whom?
Think about it, Sabrina. There are still huge global corporations out there in the world with monetary, political, medical, even military interests. And right here, they have a perfect laboratory and two geniuses creating technologies that can change the world.
2 geniuses?
She said, staring down at the ground before snapping her head back up.
You mean Moshi?
That is right. Corporations, scientists, doctors would love to get their hands on children who can see things that are about to happen. But Dag keeps them at bay with other inventions that are revolutionary. Inventions from your other uncle, Moshi. Dag keeps Moshi scrambled so he won't remember who he is. And, in exchange for his inventions, Dag gets things manufactured. Like your suit. Sabrina placed a gloved hand on her breast, rubbing the mesh of the suit beneath her fingertips.
You didn't think they were made in here, did you? Zell said, gesturing at her own suit. Where is the factory that churns these out?
I thought the head ministry.
Good guess, but no. Suits and weapons are outsourced, but the Elveds were created at the head ministry, as far as we can tell. All of Dag's work on cloning remains there.
Cloning?
Zell sighed. 15 years ago, he requested 9 cloning vats, as well as cybernetic interfaces. Corporations paid for it all.
Why?
Think about it. If you can download false memories into a person, you have to also download true ones. Why not your own? Dag may have found a secret to immortality. Most people think he is trying to clone himself. After all, who else could he trust with the maintenance of his experiment, other than himself?
Impossible.
Nothing is impossible. The cloning vats and cybernetic technology are the 2 biggest requests he has made. And his admirers and allies outside the wall were more than happy to fulfill them.
Sabrina looked at her suit. Cybernetics. These suits interact with the mind.
And body. Outside the wall, they have revolutionized fields as diverse as medicine, to search and rescue, to law enforcement, to construction.
So the experiment goes on because Dag bribes the outside world with inventions?
It's more complicated than that. The world has changed, moved on. We did indeed look into the abyss, but we pulled back. The world is a more tolerant place now. The Twin Cities remain to remind us of the danger that awaits us in fundamentalism.
So, it is a more peaceful world?
Yes. Immeasurably so. But this experiment cannot be stopped now. Not without serious loss of life.
I don't understand.
When they leave the proximity of the Com Towers, 15% of the reprogrammed population experience adverse effects.
The rage.
Zell nodded, her lips a grim line. There is no cure for it. Outside the Com Towers, those people are lost.
Sabrina stopped and thought about herself. I can't remember my parents. Is that because of the Com Towers, or the treatment I had to inoculate me?
The wind swirled, sending a shower of sand grains onto their shoulders and around their torsos. Zell shook her head, looking at the veins of sand flowing over her body. We don't know. All the records on you are sealed. But what we do know is that it appears you should be like the Skrits. You were never treated.
Never treated?
You should be forgetting a lot more than your parents. But something makes you different.
Who sealed the records?
Dag. No one knows where you came from. No one knows what makes you immune. A lot of people are watching you as a result. Every T-man knows your name.
They always ignored me.
Pretended to, Sabrina. Pretended.